Utah Sierra is two ranges. One of them is the Wasatch, the other one is the Hurricane, and the other one is the Uinta. The northern is the Uinta, the Wasatch is around Nephi, but the Hurricane only extends up to the Little Creek of the Old Spanish Trail. So the Little Creek is the home of the Old Spanish Trail. The other one is that the Utes, the ones we're talking about, the Ute, not the politically designated tribe, the Utes are all to the north. There were no Utes in southern Utah. There were Shoshone of a few wandering groups, but the others are the Paiutes, the one in St. George, the Shivwits, the Kanab. Those are all individual family tribal groups. They were not part of the Utes. They were only declared that by an official designation of the Congress because they couldn't find any other place to put these family groups. So they threw them in with the Paiutes. They have a Paiute-Yutecan language, but they have no commonality. Wakara was the one who was most famous for the Old Spanish Trail. He was the one that commented, and he says, I can always make more children, but I can't make more gun. And so he was trading children from the Paiutes, the Shivwits, the others. He was not taking Ute children. He was coming down to these lesser tribes, scarfing them up, and then putting them with the Spanish to trade for goods. And ostensibly, they were taking the children to bring them into Christianity. Yeah. And one of the interesting things about that is Christianity, when the Spanish declaration was that all of the indigenous peoples were citizens of Spain, and that was by decree. That was the law. That included the entire country. It was the Jesuits and the priests that looked at it and said, well, we'll interpret that as if you're a Christian, then you can become a citizen of Spain, and they determined who was baptized, so that's how they got around the law. When was the law passed? Well, it came with Columbus. I mean, the decree was from Isabel, from the crown, and that persisted throughout the entire period till the 1668. Sorry, didn't mean to intervene. I just wanted to get even with this guy over here. I don't know why this is up here. No, that's fine. I wanted to remind you and make a couple of political statements. Sometimes our perspective is challenged and sometimes it's rewarded. One of the things that is really evident is that many of us stand on the shoulders of giants. And when you stand on the shoulder of a giant, you have a little different perspective and you can see a long ways. We have a couple of giants in here that I don't think you fully appreciate. One of those is sitting right here. Paula Mitchell has done more for this organization over time than even Ashley thinks he has done. Now, when Paula got started, at the time, she was working in the special collections at Southern Utah University with Janet Segmiller and a bunch of other people, and she was a staff person about 2002, 2004. And through her auspices and working with Scott and the president, Scott Wyatt, who's a current kind of president, and Benson, she facilitated the acquisition of the National Archives for the Old Spanish Trail, which fall under her design. At the same time, other individuals have donated thousands of volumes into the special collections of the archives of Southern Utah University. She was also the mentor for the first, the first convention of the Old Spanish Trail. You remember that back a long time ago? We had over 400 people from Ostend around to that convention, and that's what the proceedings are that Mark still is selling. So that's one of the person. The other one has to be Paul. Paul is a great guy. He's a little bit ornery to deal with sometimes. His perspective gets a little bit challenging. When I started out with the Old Spanish Trail, good many years ago, I was working with a fellow by the name of Wayne Hinton, and later to Steve Heath, went to Steve Heath, and then to Reba, and then eventually we got down to this guy here, and Paul picked this up. Well, the thing that's interesting that is talk about perspective is that when I started off, I was taught and learned back in about 2000, 2004, for instance, I'll just take an example, that our Mayho, when they crossed the trail, went down through the Virgin Gorge. Well, I've taught that for a good many years. Now there's a question, did he go through the Virgin Gorge or did he not? So I asked other people. Diana Hoth came up and she says, no, it was just north of there. Then I go to Diana Ferris and she says, no, it was around the other end. Then I talked to a couple of the archaeologists and they say, no, they went up around through the to the river. I'm trying to think of the actual place up there where the Indian side is, where the reservation is. So when it comes down to it, we learn more the more we work. And one of the benefits of this organization is that it's not the trail that's changing, it's our awareness through history. So I don't know what the consensus is right now of where our Mayho went through the canyon. That's a little bit debatable. But I do understand that we're getting closer and closer to the information that makes us all happy, and that's because of our history. One of the things that I was told a long time ago is that if you don't write it down, it never happened. If you don't write it down, it never happened. And so within our organization, we're losing a lot of that history, and that's why I'm sure that Ashley had invited me to come back and repeat some of the history that I hope to do this morning. And hopefully that's why you're here, and if I can do my job, I'll be glad to do that. I have an individual that's a very special friend. His name is Dieter Buchstor. And Dieter was a 104 pilot, which means that an airplane that goes really, really fast is an interceptor. He was later a pilot in the 777s. And Uchtdorf made a comment. He says, there's a thing called the gospel from 30,000 feet. Do you see what that may mean? When you look at the earth, as we do, at ground level, Jack, you see a different perspective than you do from looking at the hill. When I fly over the valleys, and Ashley and I can see the trail, you have a different perspective. When you move up a little bit higher and use drone technology, you can have another perspective. And there are people who still believe that you can't find the old Spanish trail. That's garbage. You can find it. It's either there botanically because the flora and the fauna all change. It's there because of the dust. It's there because of the winds. It's there because when the water changes. It all depends upon when you look at what you see. And that perspective needs to be a little bit more broadly understood within the organization, because once again, we stand on the shoulders of giants, but not everybody sees the same face or the same wall, and those things are really important to us. So my job this morning is to go back, and I'm going to stand on the head of some giants, and I'm going to give you some information that came from my family, as well as from Paula and from Janet Segmiller and all of the people that I could find, because this lady skated on me. She was supposed to be doing this. All right, I'm going to try this, and I believe Nicole said that I could. I want you to recognize that the Special Collections Library is Paula Mitchell. Now, we get that. Thank you. She deserves it all. Okay, my clicker's not working. Okay, this is where we start. One of the things that we need to understand, and very few people do, is there's the Old Spanish Trail, the Old Spanish Trail, and the Spanish Trail. Do you recognize the difference? Most people don't. The old National Historic Old Spanish Trail is the people we are. But there's another group of the Old Spanish Trail which is associated with Dominguez and Escalante. That's where most of our naming comes from, within the Utah and Colorado and those other areas. There's another one out there that is called the Spanish Trail. Who was that? Well, there are different times and different situations, and so as I try to go through this, the Spanish Trail was an association that was formed in about 1940. Some of those were worked together, and these are the people. Ezra Meeker was an individual from the Oregon Trail. He traveled the Oregon Trail. During the 1900s, late 1900s, there was a thing called an automobile, and he purchased a Briscoe, and he wanted to drive that sucker all the way across the old Spanish Trail. So he got a hold of Howard Driggs, who was a historian, and they piled into that truck, and they drove it all the way back to Washington, D.C. to recognize the historic Oregon Trail. When they returned back to Utah, Driggs was working at the University of Utah at that time, was basically a student, and he was involved in this thing. He eventually moved to Cedar City, Utah, and became a historian, and eventually worked with the presidency. And they formed what was called the Spanish Trail Association. And it all came from the two of them driving that old Model T all the way across the country. Okay, these are the people that did it. This is the new, by the way, these are all in your archives, either from Dad or from somebody else. This is the group that President George Allen Smith and President Grant, those are prophets of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They got involved in it because the trail from basically Missouri across Oregon Trail is the Pioneer Trail. And so it was a Mormon corridor, as well as when they dropped off and came into Utah in 1847, the Oregon Trail continued, so the two had a common purpose. They formed an organization called the Spanish Trail Association, and this is at the Branch Normal School. He was a professor there and taught history for some time. I could name the other people. I don't think you're interested in that. But this is where the Spanish Trail originated. In the 1920s, there was a railroad that came down through Lund, headed on out, and Union Pacific decided they wanted to have an excursion to go into the national parks. Well, they built an outfit called the El Escalante Hotel, and that's not my purpose, that's another side. But when they did that, they called it the Old Spanish Trail, El Escalante. And if you look down here in the points, whoops, I'm got to make sure they get it right. And right here, along this thing, it says Escalante. It was not the old Spanish Trail as we know it. It was the Dominguez Escalante that had gone up through the north through Salt Lake, and they were the only thing they have in common is that the two trails cross at 90 degrees at a place called Wichita on Highway 56 in southern Utah. That's the only thing they have in common. But the organization persisted from then on, and they continued as the Spanish Trail, and they started marking the trail. This one happens to be in Enoch. The other one is at Summit. We just replaced the sign at Summit. I have two of them that are going out to the west. But this is the Spanish Trail Association, which really is only the grassroots from who we are and where we're headed. Say again? This one is in, the original was made in Enoch, Utah, a little tiny town exactly on the old Spanish Trail where the springs are. It was called Johnson Springs at that time. Enoch, E-N-O-C-H. It was the city of Enoch. Yeah. And these were all, this was not an Eagle because they didn't have Eagle Scout projects at that time, but this was done by the Boy Scouts of America because they were enlisted by the Spanish Trail as labor to go out throughout the entire region. And so the Spanish Trail Association began the groundwork to mark the trail as they knew it, but they're not talking about the 2,700 miles. They're talking about the pioneer access that was on the old Spanish Trail. So once again, the church had involvement, as well as the Boy Scouts have involvement, as well as the trails, all came together to form where we're headed. This is typical. There are 5 of these that I've known of. I can only find one. This was again in 1940, and this was the Spanish Trail. This one is at a church. This is on Main Street on the north end, where the little park is. They moved it up to the chapel a little bit later. And these are people actually, this is really sad. I know these people. Okay, this is what they came up with, and for the first time, I think, and you should understand, all of you, the individual who actually designed that was shown. And he was from Howard Driggs, who was an associate of the Oregon Trail, who sat down and said, I need a model to make the Spanish Trail Association. He said, what are we going to do? He came up with the drawings, and they published this one. And the only one that is still original is in my possession, and it's in the Museum of the San Rafael up there on the Lone. And most of, if not all, of the artifacts of the old Spanish Trail, which include a hootenanny, which is a mule drop. It includes a priest's amulet. It includes a pistol. It's a matchlock pistol that was found. It includes all the accoutrements of the mule packing gear. Those are all there. It includes some doll fetishes. All of those were found at this time and are now in a repository in that museum until OSTA can find a place to put them, and then they will become yours. That's part of the trust. I don't know if you have any question. You'll see this out here. My wife and I made 100 of these signs. We donated them to OSTA. When Conchita was talking about seeing them on Cedar Road, that was one of our signs. Mark has some back here, and so we just make those as required. And I just got notice yesterday evening that we have 3 more of the big signs that'll be going out on the major, and they're in the process of being replaced as we speak. Okay? This one is yours. Ashley, go find it. I found this picture. I know a couple of the people. I know some of the matrons here, and I do not know this guy. I can't find him. The others have their heads back, but that was the original installation of the first Spanish Trail monument and sign that was done here. This is not the old Spanish Trail.
You don't know where that stood?
Probably close to the fort, I would think.
It stood at the old railroad station downtown.
Old railroad station downtown. See, that's why we have you, Ashley. On Fremont Street. That makes sense, doesn't it? California, Nancy, I'd like to go find this one again. I'm sure we could probably find some people that can identify these. Now, after we got started on this, after the association got started, they then, and you can switch, Nick. After they started the association, they had these, and they came up with 100 signs. And they produced them, and then they went out on a solicitation all across the trail and went out to every community, and they auctioned them, if you will, not an auction reel, but they sold them for $100 each, with the understanding that they would all go out on October 12th, and everybody would post the signs at the same day. Do you know why October 12th, 11th, actually 11th October? No, but it's close. Nicole's right on target. It was Columbus Day, but that's not the answer. And I don't expect it. If Paula could answer that, I'd know that she had wings. That was the day that Dominguez and Escalante came into Cedar Valley and camped at a thing called Cedar Creek just before they went to the Canyon of the Virgin, which is now called Kolob. And when they camped there, that was the first day that Driggs and Palmer went together and said, okay, we're representing us. And so they chose that day to install all of the trails all the way across the country. Now, they were not all done on the same day because some communities were a little bit later, but they had all committed to post the the Spanish Trail, and they did so. It was not until about 4 or 5 years later, which was about 1963, then they went ahead and they started the obelisks in association with both the Bureau of Land Management and also the Boy Scouts of America. And so the obelisks that were put across the country were all done under the auspices of this group as they coordinated the locations, and then they went to local people and said, put them where you want. There was no design as to where they want. So, I had the opportunity of being with the organization when the government made the decision as to where the trail was. And I can guarantee you that it was totally arbitrary. They listened to us sometimes, they didn't. They had the line going up over the mountains instead of around it. There were so many errors in the proposal that came through because they were starting to use a thing called GIS. Global information or geomagnetic information. And they're plotting this stuff on a computer. Well, we in our organization had been going out with footprints and finding it and saying this is where the trail is. And so here's Osta and Santa Fe sitting down with all of the government people from Aaron Mar and then going through this thing and saying, wait a second, where's this line going? And it was all GIS imprinted information that we were trying to wiggle back to a normal place. And it took so much manpower and so much time that they just shook their hands and said, we got to have a line. Congress, give us a line. They gave you a line. And the idea of getting Congress to change that line is pushing dirt. Not going to happen. You can try all you want, Jack, but good luck. Good luck. Okay. This is where we kind of move into a new arena. Once President Bush signed and created the National Historic Trail, and this organization came into being and we started working originally. And when we did that, one of the things we recognized is that there's a lot of work to be done. This one is the last iteration. This was done by the Bureau of Land Management, who told us that we were now, even though we're official, if you notice the posters out here, all of the hats have changed and the appearance of the mules. You can't have a dome, you can't have a serape. All of the association with Mexico has been wiped out, and all of the literature that we now have to sign the old Spanish Trail. And if you notice right here, you'll see, if you see his hat as one of the distinctive things, on all of the silhouettes, they want us to go out and change all the hats because some of them have a furrow or had a dome in it. Don't understand that. This is a trail that you know well. That's a lot of trails. Basically, the one thing I want to call your attention to is there are choke points here and here. There's one up there. These are places where we know absolutely where they went. Nobody's disagreeing with it. One of the biggest is Castlegate out of here, just up the road here. You'll go there tomorrow. When you get to Castlegate, you're going to see the petroglyphs. You're going to see the inscriptions. You're going to see the interpretive panel that Mark put together up there. And you'll see about 27 of those individual symbols. This one, I put the October 50 just to give you a status. William R. Palmer was a very interesting guy. I knew him originally. I sat at his feet. He wrote a book called Why the North Star Stands Still, which was authored by my father. But he was also the branch president for the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints out of Cedar City to the Indian tribes. So he was the designated Indian agent of the church to pull this information together, and therefore he was working with the scouts, and that's how I came to know him so well. Here's where we started. We did that. This is one of the 1964, 65 signs. There aren't many of them left. Some organizations to the south that had more money, the BLM used concrete obelisks. Those of us up in the Parowan area didn't have that kind of money, and so we used the Boy Scout signs. And this one happens to be just outside of Parowan. This is again, some of you recognize the signs laying down. We finally got the Forest Service to help us with this one, which is at the very top of the swales and the traces that are still evident in Little Creek Canyon. This is the junction of Red Creek to Bear Valley, to some of you who understand what we're talking about. So that was one of them. Then we got this one. See that? Anybody recognize it? Anybody know where it is? Well, you would. It's dead center on the old Spanish Trail in a place called Iron Springs in Iron County, which is now one of the big resort that is completely dedicated to the old Spanish Trail. They're doing a magnificent job of it. This one sits, this is a nice picture, but the resort is about 10 feet on the other side. It's not very far at all. This is another one that we just put up recently. This is one that is in Enoch, Utah. It is on the trail, and if you'll notice, and I can't really show you because of the picture, but if you see this swale, that is the National Historic Old Spanish Trail. Goes right through the side of it, and the offices to the side of it are, in fact, even their police station, their patch is an old Spanish Trail sign. No, this is in Enoch, but it's about 3 blocks away from where you're talking. This is the city center where it goes past. The other one is at Johnson Springs, which is just a little bit further north, about a mile apart. This, I had these to bring. Your fearless leader. Anybody know why Ashley is called fearless? He's fearless. I put him in the back of an airplane called a Citadria. And we went out about 140 miles an hour at 25 feet for 600 miles. And we flew out of Salt Lake and went clear down to Mesquite, and then we flew the entire old Spanish Trail back. Well, that was to prove what I was talking about, what we could see. And between him removing his hands from his eyes and screaming a lot, we looked down on the ground, and lo and behold, we saw that the Spanish Trail was being encroached upon without our knowledge. They were putting one of these solar farms right across it. And I have pictures that we took looking down from the airplane, and you can see the trail going right through it, because when they bulldozed over for the solar farm, they didn't go deep enough to disturb the trail, and so it's still visible right through the corner. So we said, oh, darn. It was a little different than that. We landed, we went to the planning meeting for the county commissioner and said, why are you doing this? I said, we didn't know any different. I went to the contractors, why are you doing this? We don't know any different. Well, why don't you know this stuff? Because nobody told us. So I went down and looked at what is called the EIS statement, the environmental impact of those things. Ashley was given a copy of it. And guess what they said? No known architectural, no known archaeological, no known impact. And we're sitting right there in the middle with Paula's special collections with copious volume. They just never bothered to look. So they were guilty, the county was guilty, the state was guilty, everybody was guilty for not paying attention. But I looked at it and said, we're guilty too, because we didn't tell them where the trail was. Okay? So that's what you call a compromise, a consortium. Sir?
What happened when they found all of this information out? What was the end result?
Do you really want to know?
Did they correct?
Come here to my lecture today and I'll tell you. Okay? So once we got this all together, we looked at it and said, okay, the only thing, and this was Ashley's input, the only thing we can do, we can't change the farm, we can't change the information, what they call the release of construction. So what we will do is we will demand mitigation. Okay, that's part of your answer. So we went to the solar farms, and they said, you did this twice, and they said, well, fine, how much is it worth? How about $30,000? That's what they proposed at that time. We were just starting discussions. We took that $30,000, went to the county and said, you messed up. What can you do? And they looked at us and said, well, we didn't know about this, but we will provide you signposts and labor and coordination to do whatever you want to do. So then we took that to OSTA, contributed. Then we went to the state of Utah and said, you're complicitory. We wound up with $87,000 to do nothing but sign the trail across Iron County. And that's what you're looking at. This one right here that you're looking at is Summit. That's going between Parowan and the other side. And then I had all of these, and we went out in about less than a month, and we signed the entire trail as far as we could go, with the BLM doing their part by providing us access to buy the signs, but they also gave us the footprint. It's just the hardest part of this whole thing, because they would tell us, here's your EIS, you can put them here. And so they did that. So we didn't have to do any paperwork. They said, you tell us where you want them, and we'll make it happen. We did that, they did that, they did that, they did that, and we now have 197 locations, and we have nearly all of the trail. We've lost 2 signs to theft. We've had no bullet holes in them yet. The only thing we've come up with is we don't have enough, and we're trying to get more signage because it's a long trail. This is what was annoyance. We were sitting in 2004 with a meeting of the Old Spanish Trail Association. It happened to have been held in Montrose, Colorado, saying, what can we do as OSTA to this thing? And somebody said, well, how about silhouettes? We saw what was going here in Las Vegas, and we went out to do that. You know, those silhouettes were $1,280 a piece. We didn't have that kind of money. And especially that's per unit. That's each one of these guys. Now, some of them are cutouts. This one happens to be in the raw, so it's not a cutout, it's just an emblem. So by the time we got all of that done, up on Cedar Mesa, they put out 7 horses with pack saddles going into the Uinta. Not mules, not anything else. They were pack saddles for outfitters. And each one of those were $1,200 to $1,500. So we sat down, and I went to Paula, and I went to Scott in the university and said, I need help. And so we went to the university, and we got a couple of people that were doing design over in the old field house. And they said, we can do that, and so you give us what you want. I sketched this out. They came up with the drawing. We came up with a catalog, and the catalog is about 8 pages long. And what we can do is, if you want one of these kind of people, we can change the step, we can change the pack, we can change the head, we can change the tail. And so out of these 6 elements up here, we can get about 24 combinations. So whatever you want. And I think probably if Rob Sweeten is here, he may talk to that a little bit later. The silhouettes are all made out of A300 steel. When I started on, they were $110 a piece, and right now they're up to $300. Because of the change of the price of steel. The little silhouettes we got out here, we were giving them for $10, and they're now up to $50 just to materials. Should also mention that all of the labor, the design was helped by the university, the print and the computer work was done by the university. Everything has been donated. They did not use 1 cent of the mitigation money that we've received out of the $85,000 in this project. Nothing except the purchase of steel. This is what it looks like. I think you can see from the different colorations. I just laid a couple of these on the floor. I get help from others to do the welding. It's a fun thing because I'm a welding engineer. I can teach them how to do that. I can do my own cutting and run the plasma. And I get the kids out or people that come in and volunteers, and they really have a blast. This is the workshop. You can see at this point we're running 20 copies for Donna Lynn Ferris for the BLM. And guess what the secret is? Let the BLM put it up. Because when they put it up, they get the credit, and they shine, and they really get a smiley face, and we get to walk off with the gold in our pockets. It's the best way to make it work. Nothing more there that I can see. This is the very first one we put up. These are plasma cut. I initially started doing with acetylene, oxyacetylene. And do you have any idea what the price of acetylene is today? So we had to go to Air Arc, and it works. It's not handy, but it works. I don't know who that is, but I hope you never see him again. This is our assembly line. And we talk about an assembly line. If you're looking, we have roughly 197. There's quite a bit of demand. We don't always have the time. I've had some problems, as some of you recognize, over the last year in a caregiving situation. So things have slowed down a little bit. But Thelma and I just delivered 8 of them to Moab, and they're going in with the backcountry horsemen. Once again, we don't do the labor. We just do the head work, and we get them to them, and they put them up. So I think they're really happy now. Okay, those are some of them that's what they look like. I don't know how else to put them. We have different photos. One of the things I would like to recognize, if you look on your little flyer thing, I thought that was a nice thing that Lynn did for us. On your schedule there, hold it up. Tell me you got one. No. This one. See them? If you look at them, you see that they have been modified so that now we have not cutouts, where we put highlights where the sun shines through them. And you get one of those things in a snowfield, and they really look good. I'm proud of our organization for doing this. This is a set that was demanded. The information was so bad that we just tore the signs down and threw them away because it was terrible. So we took that down, and then I and my wife put this thing together and replaced it at no cost, which Parowan liked. And then we managed to get the county to put these guys in. One of the things that's kind of different, if you notice this one, by doing computer graphics, you can get a 3D effect. It's like an optical illusion, so you can't tell whether the mule is coming towards you or away, or whether it's a rider or something else, and they really work out nicely. So we're evolving. We're getting better all the time. This one happens to be at Summit. There's one. See the example here where the light shines through it? So depending upon how you place them, you could really get a lot of mileage. The first day that we put this one in place on the Utah Hill, I was standing there because I had to readjust some of the silhouettes themselves. I had 35 cars stop and ask me what I was doing. This one I did not do. This one is at Green River. This was done by the Emery Group of Osta, and I don't know a lot about how they cut them out, but this one was done with a different approach and a different artistry. That was not part of our mitigation. This is the one that I'm working on right now. This is for Antelope Springs, and what we're going to do, Mark, is we're going to put an interpretive center that we have permission on top of a hill. We're going to have a viewscape that will have no evident human habitation within sight. This one is another string. If you notice, this one is an adaptation. This guy is riding parallel to the mule train. On one of these others, you'll notice where there's an outrider that we've placed that is looking back. So there are variations in them. No two of them are ever the same. This one there, if I got it, I was hoping to see a little bit of difference. This is what we call a high back. This is a little head, and that's a little pokey. And the little guy right here, I believe, is going to Santa Clara. The home, somebody talked to me just yesterday, and I promised to put one of these at his home in Santa Clara. This one is, there's one. This guy is, you see this one is a stationary rider, and this one is a line rider. This guy is riding with him. That one is turned, kind of looking back. This is a little guy, and the big ones are in another place. This one happens to be on the physical trail. If any of you notice this line coming right across there, that's the swale of the old Spanish trail. In this case, superimposed with the Pioneer Trail, because this is at the Jefferson Hunt Monument, where they broke off and came for the 49ers. This is the one that I'm talking about. This was an Eagle Scout project, just like your friend there. Thank you very much, by the way. I hope you bring more young people in with you to help us. We need it. This is the kind of project that works really well. And what Thelma and I are doing, I'm in the process, I've got this steel now, to cut 6 8-foot posts, and they'll have an awning and a sloping lid and those kind of things. And there'll be a place where there's a rack with an interpretive center that Mark is helping me make. And we're going to put that one on there, and that'll give the viewscape, and it'll show the tectonics of this great basin. You can see the Dominguez Escalante casting of the lot sides. This is out by the butte. This is another one that we did. You notice that this one has the same artist. This one is at Richfield. This is in the city center, got together and said, we've seen these things, we want more of them. The others are back in, that one is the Green River List. This one is a new one. This one's just been installed. And this is, by the way, if you really want to make something happen, whatever you do, make it somebody else's idea. Because people don't respond to your ideas. They really don't. I didn't think we were ever going to get this thing until I went to the state and I said, by the way, if you guys put it up, then then you'll get some. They put this one as a Little Bear Valley at the head of Highway 20. And not only did they give us permission to put it on Sitla, that state land, because this isn't federal, they came in and mowed the place down and showed us where they wanted us to put them. This is one of the longer strings. These are both on Interstate 80 or Interstate 15. If you can see in the background, this one is taken directly from a car on I-15 just outside of Summit. And because it's on the trail, it's a little further away. And then this one is at Paraguna going into Red Creek. This one, if you'll notice, and once again, the reason this is in here, there's the trail. So as often as we can, these are going in place so that when you go out and see them, you're going to see it in situ. And then there's another aspect, and I don't know that I have for right now. I may have to get it. I'll check. We put other signs. There's one. Now this one, I'm going to use this one. That's in Meeker. But this sign is placed at essentially every one of the strings. So I've been showing you pictures of the silhouette elements in a string. But when you drive out to, I don't know, pick a place, Newcastle, and you go out and see that string, there's an interpretive sign there. If you go out to Summit, there's an interpretive sign that says all kinds of good things about the trail. This one is one somebody asked me, the Colorado guys. I was talking, this is down at La Garita, just off the trail coming out at Abiquiu. This is one that I did a number of years ago. And what we wanted to do is mark the trail, but we didn't have logos. We just did it. And so this was just on what they call Poso at La Garita. It's between Saguache, Doug. You were there. We drove up there when we went on the Coach Toe Pass. So this is where the Caritas marks are in the ground at just south of Saguache at La Garita. And that's my guy. Anybody says that the petroglyphs they didn't represent the trail. Look at this guy real close. This is in St. George. It's almost in the center. It's on the Santa Clara River, and I have never told anybody where it is. I ain't gonna. I'm hoping that you'll have a lot of questions. I'm not going to wait too long. This, to me, is the crowning glory of Ulster for the last X number of years. Every single person that went to California, whether he was on all the old Spanish Trail or not, came right through here, right down there, and stopped right there. And we have a new marker that's going right there that's already in place. This is Castle Cliff. It's just barely outside of St. George. I think you're going up there, aren't you? Aren't you going to go up the hill? Okay, you'll go to Castle Cliff. Now, this one, I'm not going to tell you exactly where it is, but actually, if you go to Castle Cliff, where the hole is, where the cavern is cut into the wall at the service station, if you look real close, you'll see that Spanish cross. Everybody went through there. This one has an ankh, or what I call a latitude hook. Those of you who would like to know what that is, come back at 1 o'clock and we'll inform you. But this is the same place. Again, Spanish inscriptions on the trail at that point. And I don't think I emphasized it enough. Everybody went through Castle Cliff, because at that point, that's the first point you see the unending desert. Castle Cliff is the first point you see, or when you leave it, that you see water and hope that you're going to survive. And I want you to know that Mark Franklin did an outstanding job on that interpretive panel. It's down there at the bottom. This one is, again, the same thing. I think that's Paul over there. That was then this is the group when we went over to Passaporaki, and you're going to get a lot of information on that this afternoon, so I will tell him. This one was something that was really important to me, to my wife, to ourselves. If you go out here, many of you may not know that we have chartered, composed, produced, and have CDs of the National Historic Old Spanish Trail Symphony sitting on the table out there. That was done with our money. It was composed to make that music, and I think you're going to enjoy it. After we got through with that, got through with the project, something you may not know, many of you heard, I probably should ask for a show of hands, of the piano guys. Okay, way to go, Nicole. The piano guys were the guys that did it for us. So we chartered them, and they went on to great fame. So when you get the CD that is out here now that Mark has, all of the back of it is the piano guys. There are 5 cuts that have never been published, and they are extraordinary. And anyway, the reason I'm calling this, I took this of a reenactment that we made for the video for the Old Spanish Trail in 2006. This was done by Video Ideas. It was the accented, it went to the symphony. We got a lot of mileage out of this thing. And then, mentioned here, this was the one over the rock at Moapa. Well, what they didn't tell you is that within a very short distance, with actually walking distance, there were 5 other petroglyph sites right there. I'd like to have somebody interested enough we can show those, because I don't want to lose those. That one, this is really a special one. This is in Red Creek Canyon at Paragona. I don't think there's anybody in here that's ever seen this, because I try to be circumspect with what I find and what I do with it. But I'm fairly confident that this is a tally of people or trips going right through it. And this is within 25 feet of the outlet of the park. It's right next to the Wright inscriptions. It's right next to the Steve Heath does that for the William Knight inscription. I keep looking at Paula because she understands this stuff. Okay, this one, where is my lady? Conchita. If you're listening, this is for you. The rocks that she referred to with the William Waltskill Yond When they hiked out of Panguitch, they went up to the nearest hill, which was called Bryan Head. It's 11,347 feet high. When they got to the top of that, they could then see the whole world. The universe is out there. And down below them, since they're in the winter, they saw steam coming out. And they headed down the mountain into a thing called Wind Canyon and wound up in Braffitt's Hollow. And that's where they camped, because the Indians were using that, as was the Spanish in the hot springs in Braffitt's. The gouge and stuff is all there. Well, the rock that she was referring to is right here. See the gold? Well, this was taken in 1949. This is one of Alva's photos. So is that one, and so is this one. But when the rock was in there, that they made these inscriptions, she alluded to the fact that there was one rock. No, there were two of them, and the other one was bigger than the first. And so on that rock were the other inscriptions and the initials that Steve Heath was talking about that led credence to the fact that this is in fact the Wolfskill yacht. We have an individual who will not be named by the way of Jackson, his name was Frank, decided that there was gold buried under it because of this. Well, he went out there with a stack of dynamite and blew the doggone rock out of the ground so he could dig underneath it. And in the process, he killed rock number 2, and this one rolled into the valley and was there for about 8 or 10 years before I found it again, because I knew what I was looking for. And I didn't think he would have chopped it up. He didn't. So we found it for Conchita, and that's why we took her over there. Now, if you notice over here for me, can you see these really nice petroglyphs? They're about 50 feet off to the left of this one. So they're right in the same locale. See this one? This is less than a couple of 100 yards. See the square snake in there? How many of you have ever seen a square snake? Not many. But the point of all of my deliberations is to get you all excited about what I'm going to show you next. Behind the glyph is an 1831 inscription. Who was there in 1831? Wolfskill and Yacht. And so here's one of those instances when you have a date in a petroglyph when you can actually kind of have an idea of dating it. So this is Braffitt's Wind Canyon, and Lynn is in the process, I think. We took the group out to film it. This is where those petroglyphs are. We've been to the yacht dock. Okay, there are those who say I have 32, Thelma's got them over here, Spanish inscriptions on the old Spanish Trail. So when they didn't have anything to do, they like to leave their mark one way or another. This one is in that one's just out of Parowan. This one here, you can see what appears to me to be some type of a map with the trail spreading apart. This is just outside of Paraguna. All of these you can drive right to. People just don't recognize. There you go. Have you ever seen? Now, who in the whole world would make a petroglyph in Braffitt's Canyon of 1831 with a cross of Lorraine? I mean, okay, had to be somebody that knew what they were doing. And then this one is the detachment that went into the Mountain Meadows when they buried the bodies out there. That was a military detachment. Anybody recognize the semblance there for our association? Beautiful, beautiful. How about this one? Those are not petroglyphs. Those are engraved with a steel instrument, and they are relief. So they're about 1/4 of an inch deep. Whoever did that, once again, there's the Spanish Cross of Lorraine, and it's as good as this one, and then this was just up above it, but can you see this? That's not a petroglyph. That's a Spanish marker for, come on, help me with the word, distance. what is it? Somebody in Spanish. What's the measurement for a foot? What? Fine. Vega. That's the one I was at. That's what it is. So we know that that's Spanish. We know that it was put in there by somebody that had that, and we know that they had something to tell. And this is in Right Hand Canyon in Parowan. Now, what I did with this one, because I couldn't see the Vega clearly, all I did with this thing is played with the computer to try and enhance it. So I'm just making it so that you can see it a little better. This one, the only person in here that knows where that is Lynn. This one is Paul. I took Paul out here once. I think that's the New Mexico symbol, the sun symbol. So I can't speak to that, but I can speak to that ugly guy right there. And you see that perfect Spanish cross? That took a lot of time. These I've found numerous. I've only got 2 here. This one is exactly on the trail. All of these are. And you see the Spanish cross, and when I've inquired with an individual that I trust implicitly by the name of Lyman Platt, and he tells me that this is the symbol, see they're different, that the cross, and then it has a leg on it, and that shows direction to the next mission or to the next place. These are at Pipe Springs, and these are directional signals that they used along that portion of the trail to know where they were coming and how to get back. And these are Armejo. This is the Armejo Trail. This is not up on the North Branch. Okay, try this one on. Paul may know where those are. Those are at Cat Canyon, just outside of Page. We've seen that before, but from a different angle. I kind of like that one because of the viewscape out there. And we've made these silhouettes, by the way, so that there's no standing interruptions like posts and trees and things like that. This is one of the signs that I mentioned, and if you look across here, this was in Highway 91. This shows the segment of the trail. It shows the interpretation. It has a logo with other locations on it, and down here is the interpretive information that is generic to all of them. And I think right now, if I'm correct, we have 23 of these sites that have been so identified. How many of you have really good eyesight? Can you see why it's there? Going. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if you'll notice right there, that's Interstate 15. So I'm standing here on Old 91 to put the sign here to talk about something over there because I want it over there so people can see it.
Anybody have any questions?
I just wanted to ask you, so how many states are the silhouettes in now? I know Utah.
How many silhouettes in the map, actually? We got about 32.
And how many states? 4 states?
Well, I'm responsible only for Utah.
Okay.
And I know that Nevada has some. How many of you got in California? 5. They've got 5 down there.
Okay.
And there are at least 4 in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
They're at Fort Rico in Colorado.
How many in Utah?
Probably 100 and some. Now, I'm not talking size, I'm talking, they vary in numbers at any given site. But that's, yeah.
Does Mission San Gabriel have any of these silhouettes? Because they're celebrating big events right now, and I think they should be there. I think they should be there.
I can make it happen.
Okay.
I know somebody can do that.
Thanks, Al. I appreciate your approach on these silhouettes. I'm an ex-member or board member of OCTA, Oregon California Trail. And I have tried for years to get OCTA to go along with silhouettes. Now, they've done that well around the Kansas City area, but some folks just are anti-silhouettes. I think it's basically because of the cost, because you found out it's very expensive. But you guys, this is the first convention that the wife and I have been.
Thank you for coming.
But you're way ahead of Oregon California Trail Association in regards to getting your word and your picture across to the traveling public.
Did you hear what Nelson said the other day? And I'll repeat kind of for my focus. The BLM, when we hear about it today, has a way of capturing these locations and making them available to everyone. And so I'm heavily involved in that. I've got every one of these sites has been GPS photographed, status, condition, land ownership, permission, the rest of them. So all of that can be put in some type of a database that can be integrated with the BLM when Rock gets here.
Beautiful. Well, thanks again.